I came to the Amazon with a backpack full of arrogance and a camera that could see in the dark, convinced both would help me understand a place older than my idea of time. Manaus sold me the same sentence 3 different ways: boats, guides, legends. But Raimundo, the man with ore-polished hands and weather behind his eyes, sold me something harder: a quiet seat in a narrow canoe, and the promise that the river would decide what I learned. We left before the sky remembered a color. By the time the first tin light found the water, we were a small sentence sliding into a paragraph of green, heat lowered like a lid. Hyacinths gathered themselves into tidy rafts. Dragonflies stitched blue wire over the slack water. Raimundo cut the outboard and let us drift under a roof of vines that braided the morning into shade. That was when I smelled it: warm leather and wet soil. Not rot, not fish, but a note with weight. The surface ahead pouted, as if the river had inhaled and forgot to finish the breath. It rose in a careful dome. Pattern arrived second. Green-brown scales with oval rosettes stacked like closed eyes. My ribs tightened as if an invisible hand had set a ruler between them. Movies had prepped me for fireworks. The Amazon delivered math. A body thicker than memory unspooled from the hyacinths. Curve correction, each motion so stingy it felt like thought. I counted in feet until the numbers embarrassed me. The head came last, broad and workmanlike, which is how reality hides in plain view. The eyes did not glitter, they read. The tongue touched the air with a double click 1-2, and the sound printed itself behind my teeth. Somewhere a kingfisher threw a nail of blue into the day. Everything else held its breath. On the far bank, a capybara rose from the water with the casual optimism of an animal that has not yet belonged to a headline. The snake did not lunge. It made a single miser's correction and closed a door I hadn't seen. Sound narrowed to a grunt that failed to become a story. Coils followed, not a crush of Hollywood bones, but a refusal, a patient denial of air. Time lost its edges. A breeze moved one hyacinth leaf, and that tiny gesture felt indecent. The jaw didn't unhinge. I know better now, it accommodated. Teeth like black commas finding punctuation, the throat becoming a slow, muscular corridor. The river signed its approval with a faint figure 8 that wrote and erased itself at once. My fingers found the camera and then let it go. Glass would have shrunk the world into something I could carry. The world refused. Raimundo tapped the gunwale once. It sounded like a chapel cough. When the heavy thought inside her had the shape the body would allow, the anaconda slid sideways into a trellis of roots and shade. Hyacinths closed behind her like polite stagehands. The tongue wrote 1-2 once more on the damp grammar between us. I realized the legend back at the docks had only ever been a child's drawing of this precision. The old ones aren't impressive because they are large. They are large because they are correct. We backed the canoe with our hands, palms tasting brown silk, letting the current return our agency in small, forgivable pieces. Monkeys scolded us for existing. A storm stacked itself over the forest bright top, bruised bottom, and my heart kept the new metronome. Dois. Raimundo finally spoke. Se o rio deixar, amanhã a gente entra no Igapó. If the river allows. He said it the way a carpenter speaks to wood, expecting truth, not cooperation. That night, rain stitched the thatch while a gecko wrote footnotes across the lantern light. I lay in a hammock that smelled of smoke and river and practiced the count without trying. 1-2. Not a charm, a unit, a way to measure the space between appetite and act, question and answer. Sleep came like a tide, and in the seam just before it took me, I understood the boast I had arrived with had been measured politely, thoroughly, and found too long for the doorway. Morning came with the taste of metal on the air, and a river that had climbed a finger's width while no one watched, as if night had taken a quiet breath and forgotten to give it back. Raimundo pointed us toward an Igapó, a flooded forest where trees stand ankle-deep in black tea, and the light arrives already filtered into the color of patience. He spoke in short, practical sentences that felt like tools. Read the margins, not the middle. Hyacinth rafts that look combed mean something heavy past clean. Root walls hold doors disguised as shadows. Sand tongues keep a ledger commas where weight turned or thought twice. We slid the canoe into a cathedral of trunks and buttresses, the water unmoving only if you didn't know how to see movement. A frog practiced a one-note sermon. Drips counted themselves on leaves. A tinamou poured sadness into the understory without permission. Draped over a low bough was a cast skin the length of a small hallway, parted neatly down the side like a zipper, every diamond pane a glassless window. I reached. My hand stopped mid-air, embarrassed by its own hunger. Out here, touching edits a sentence you didn't write. The skin undid me, not with size, but with correctness. The exact absence a body leaves when it steps into its next exactness. We ate cold rice and salted fish in the boat, while lime rewrote the river's smell for a moment. I asked Raimundo because foreign tongues lean on questions when they can't lean on knowledge. How many giants have you seen? He shrugged a carpenter's shrug. Enough to know size is the least interesting precision. I wrote that down and hated how it sounded in ink compared to how it sounded in the water. By noon, the heat ironed the day flat. We let the canoe idle where Hyacinth stitched a soft seam across a narrow run. That was when the forest edited itself. Not silence, alignment. The rafts parted along a line too straight to be wind. The surface lifted into a reluctant dome and failed to become splash. Pattern resolved, rosettes the color of oiled bronze, each oval a closed eye that never needed to open. The head rose last, shovel plane, which is how the wild hides its authority. The tongue touched the air with a small decisive double-click 1-2, and the count wrote itself behind my teeth like a word I finally understood, not as vocabulary, but as permission. A capybara trail stitched down the bank and ended in regret. Near the roots, a thin run of bubbles ticked up regular as a metronome. Not panic, plumbing. The snake corrected its angle by the width of a thought and slid under a root vault we could not see into, not disappearing so much as continuing, which is a different verb out here. I held my camera the way a child holds a forbidden match. I did not strike it. Glass would have made a smaller truth than the one in front of me. We waited because waiting was the only correct action. Mosquitoes practiced their arithmetic on my knuckles. A breeze pressed a thumb into the canopy and released. The root wall trembled once, the way a house admits someone has left a room. She didn't reappear. The water pulled its face back on. All that remained was the faintest figure-8 wrinkle, writing and erasing itself in the same gesture, and that soft metronome still ticking behind my teeth. On the walk back across a strip of terra firme, the forest spoke in dry grammar, leaf litter popping, ant republics arguing in black gloss, buttress roots ribbing the earth like a whale sleeping too close to shore. We found another shed, smaller, younger, looped over a branch like a forgotten scarf. I felt the old arrogance in my pack go brittle. Numbers would fail me in the retelling, and that failure began to feel like honesty. Back on the water, we threaded a chute as narrow as a whispered apology, and the hyacinths parted for us only because Raimundo moved, as if he knew his weight wasn't the most important weight here. Late afternoon, a storm stacked itself in layers bright on top, bruise on the bottom and light thinned until green turned to pewter. In that hour when headlines lose interest and edges do their real work, the river's breath changed again. Hyacinths separated on a seam. The dome rose. Pattern arrived. The head wrote 1-2 into the wet grammar and read past us without judgment. Curve, correction, curve, the stingy grace of a tool perfected by use. I tried to count and my mouth refused, as if my teeth had signed a treaty with the water. She passed within a politeness of distance and chose a corridor that existed only because she believed it into being. When the tale finally resolved and the stagehands closed the curtain, the river felt flatter, as if a heavy idea had been set down exactly where it belonged. We floated inside the stripped oxygen that follows correctness. No cheer, no horror. Just the discipline of not adding adjectives to a sentence that had finished itself fine. Back at the village, radios argued soccer while oil told the truth about evening. Children sparked under stilts. A heron stood on the stern of a tourist boat with the disdain of someone who works here full-time. In the stilt house, rain began in silver coins and learned the roof quickly. I lay in the hammock and practiced the only unit that mattered. 1-2, not a charm. A gauge, the space between appetite and act, question and answer, camera and restraint. Raimundo said we'd try a tighter shoot at dawn if the water had its manners. If she says no, we go home. Out here, refusal is as instructive as an encounter, and mercy often wears the face of not today. By the third day, I had stopped asking for sightings and started asking for alignment. Raimundo led us onto a strip of terra firme so the river could turn from picture into voice. On dry ground, the forest has a different grammar leaf litter popping like quiet oil. Ant highways written in black gloss, buttress roots ribbing the earth like a whale asleep in shallow water. A shed skin hung snagged in a small tangle, unzipped neatly down one side, diamond panes like a stained glass negative. I didn't touch it. Out here, touching edits a sentence you didn't write. The most honest artifacts were absences that fit perfectly where a body used to be. We circled back to a channel so narrow it felt like the river had kept it for itself. Hyacinths floated like punctuation marks, waiting for a clause. That was where the breath changed. Not silence alignment. The mat separated along a seam too clean for wind. The surface lifted into a reluctant dome and failed to become splash. Pattern arrived as oiled bronze rosettes. The head rose last, shovel plane, which is how truth usually shows up. The tongue tapped the air 1-2, and the count printed itself behind my teeth like a word I finally understood. She did not study us. She read past us toward a corridor braided from shadow and drift, a place that wasn't a place until she believed it into being. A thread of bubbles ticked up near a root vault, regular as a metronome. Not panic. Plumbing. The snake made the smallest possible correction, the kind of economy that makes you feel clumsy for having bones, and slid under the roots. We were left with the faintest figure-8 wrinkle, writing and erasing itself in the same breath, and a quiet that felt earned rather than empty. Numbers began to feel like tourists. Back home they'd demand feet and pounds, and the distance between my hand and her head. Here the measurements that mattered were intervals and edges, the beat between 1 and 2, the temperature at which frog song drops a key, the exact width of a correction that turns existence into passage. Raimundo said little. When he did, it sanded the moment smooth. Edges, he murmured, tapping the seam where Blackwater kissed a root wall. E tudubera all margin, all brink. We drifted under lianas, writing cursive across the sky, the canoe moving on courtesy, not ambition. A caiman watched us like a footnote. A tinamou poured its soft sorrow into the understory, and the sound traveled farther than sight ever does. I realized my arrogance from day one had already been measured and politely set aside. This place did not need to argue with me. It only needed me to arrive correctly, or not at all. I found that soothing and humiliating in equal parts. Late light turned the river to pewter. Clouds stacked themselves bright top, bruise bottom, and the hyacinths ahead parted again. The dome rose. Pattern resolved. The head wrote 1-2. This time she passed within a kindness of distance, a clause of curve correction curve that made my mouth give up on counting, as if my molars had signed a truce with the water. The tail resolved into the green punctuation, and the stagehands closed the curtain. The river felt briefly flatter, as if a heavy idea had been set down where it belonged. We floated in the stripped oxygen that follows correctness. No one cheered. No one whispered, "Did you see that?" The question had been replaced by its answer. Permission, not proof. I understood then why every story I'd heard in Manaus felt both gaudy and stingy. Size sells. Precision stays. The old one isn't remarkable because she is big. She is big because she is correct. And correctness is quiet. Back at the village, radios argued soccer with the conviction of weather forecasts. Oil told the truth about evening. Children sparked under stilts. In the stilt house, rain began in silver coins and learned the roof quickly. A gecko sprinted a single line of punctuation across the wall and stopped like a period. I lay in the hammock and practiced the only useful unit I had left. 1-2, not a charm, a gauge, the gap between appetite and act, camera and restraint, question and answer. Raimundo said at dawn we'd try a shoot he only trusts when the water has its manners. If she says no, we go home. Out here, refusal is instruction. Mercy often wears the face of not today. Dawn came pewter-colored, and the river had climbed another quiet thumb along the stilts, as if night had rehearsed its breath while we slept. Raimundo said we'd try the shoot he only trusts when the water has its manners. If she says no, we go home, he reminded me, she meaning the river, not the snake. I understood how childish my grammar had been. I'd been asking for an animal when the right request was alignment. We slid into a corridor of green cursive lianas writing above us, moving on courtesy instead of horsepower. The channel narrowed to the width of a confidence. Light fell in green coins. A cayman held a route-like punctuation and took notes with one eye. Twice, Raimundo stalled us with a fingertip against the bank, once for a metronome of bubbles, once for a route wall that sounded too carefully arranged to be chance. Stillness here is a verb, not a photograph. My mouth kept the only arithmetic that mattered. 1, 2, not a spell. A gauge. The gap between appetite and act, camera and restraint, wanting and deserving. Then the forest edited itself. Hyacinths ahead parted along a seam, ruler straight. The surface rose into a reluctant dome and refused to become splash. Oiled bronze rosettes resolved. The head rose last, shovel plain as weather. The tongue wrote 1 to 2 on the damp grammar between us and printed the count behind my teeth. She did not perform, she proceeded. Curve correction, curve stingy grace of a tool perfected by use. I tried to count and numbers shrugged me off. Precision stayed. She passed within a kindness of distance, choosing a corridor that didn't exist until her body believed it into being a path, woven from density, shade, drift. A capybara trail stitched down the bank and ended in regret. Near the root vault, something made a sound like a dropped pin giving the hour its verb. The anaconda corrected by the width of a thought and went under, not disappearing but continuing. The hyacinths closed like polite stagehands. For a moment the river felt flatter, as if a heavy idea had been set down exactly where it belonged. We floated in the stripped oxygen that follows correctness. No gasp, no cheer, no, "Did you get the shot?" The proof was permission. We had been allowed to be nearby while the old intelligence moved through its necessary sentence. Rain shouldered in from the east first rumor, then silver coin loud on leaf, whisper on water. The root wall sighed the way a house does when someone leaves a room. She didn't return. She didn't need to. The lesson had already retimed my pulse. On the way out, lightning stitched white seams across a charcoal sky, and the current shouldered us toward human grammar radios, arguing soccer with weather's certainty, oil telling the truth about evening, children sparking under stilts. The village refused to lean toward my revelation. It had errands, I found that merciful. Legends should tuck under the day, not warp it. I packed small, a damp notebook, the lime's ghost on my fingers, the hammock's curve still printed down my back. I asked Raimundo the wrong question anyway. How do I see her again? He smiled like a well-hung door. You don't see, he said. You arrive correctly, and sometimes she allows. On the big river, barges pushed brown sentences downstream. Warehouses replaced root walls. My mouth kept the count 1, 2, not as souvenir, but as tool. A way to measure the pause that keeps you from breaking what you came to admire. At the port, we shook hands with the brevity men use when words would bruise the thing itself. He nodded at the water, which translated to, take the lesson, not the story. The lesson is quieter. It survives dry seasons. In the window of a plane pretending to frame what cannot be framed, I finally understood why they call her the old one in the plural. She is several added together. Patience, edge, temperature, shadow, weight summed, until the answer moves under hyacinths and writes 2 soft clicks on the air, 1, 2. If anyone asks me for proof, I'll give them what the river allowed me to keep, the rhythm behind my teeth, the figure 8 awake writes and erases, and a new instinct to leave the sentence unpunctuated when water chooses the period.